I know we have several members who are online, so please, for the sake of the meeting, keep your camera on. In our first item, we have the Kentucky Department of Education update. Commissioner Fletcher will provide that update at this time.
Thank you, Chair Biggerstaff. I appreciate that. Been a busy few weeks for all of us and for different reasons, but to give you a few updates, first and foremost, the assessment accountability, the town halls have been great. There's been some great input put out there. We did the Spanish town hall in Bowling Green last night. We're going to Eddyville later on this week, and we also have one more with OVEC with Shelbyville this week too. Also, too, the co-op meetings have been excellent. We already have some input that we feel like we're ready for a 3.0 because we're trying to do those type of changes. For example, we've had 4 prototypes and we've had 2 model frameworks. Matter of fact, framework 1.0 was presented to LSAC with input from LSAC, input from the Cool Council, and also from the Kentucky Board of Education. We put out 2.0. And with the addressing the science issue is one of those things that was addressed. So again, we do have, we're looking at some other issues as far as some of the big questions that have come up is how do we handle interim assessments? And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later of possibly doing an opt-in type setting for interim assessments. And I'll give a real quick, if it's okay with the chair, a lot of districts really want to keep their interim assessments when it comes to MAP, STAR, iReady. So one of the things that we're talking about is having interim assessments that are aligned with the summative assessment. So again, the summative assessment is not opt-in. It has to be uniform in order to identify CSI, TSI, ATSI schools. But we would have interim assessments that's aligned to the summative assessment. And if you wanted to opt into our interim assessments, you could, or if a district felt strongly about their iReady, MAP, STAR, they could keep those. So that's probably what you'll see. One of the things that we're getting so far from superintendents is possibly an opt-in. Because again, the interim assessments you can use for your local accountability, but it's not part of the overall federal accountability model. So that gives you some flexibility on how to handle that. And again, that's coming from our co-op meetings that we've had. We've had some good discussions with that. But you'll see other things as we go through. The only other item is there's a lot of discussion at in the town hall settings about what would be the parameters for social studies within the local accountability model. So that's some of the discussions there. So again, great input. We'll talk a little bit more about this, I think, later on. We got Dr. Stafford and others here with us that'll help us with that. Also, too, wanted to make every superintendent aware. I sent out an email just a few moments ago. One of the overnight we were informed, and I'll say through media, we saw some press releases talking about the freeze in federal funds. We've reached out to different contacts to see what exactly that means. How does that impact title funds? How does that impact grants? For example, we have a KYCL grant worth $55 million to address reading and literacy. What does the impact does that have to us? What we're finding out now is the parameters what exactly does this how does it look moving forward? They don't know. So I do understand that there is a deadline of February 10th for agencies within the U.S. Department of Education and throughout Washington, D.C., other agencies to do some analysis to make sure that aligns with Trump policies and to have their reports back to February 10th in order to resume the federal funding. So again, as of right now, we don't know exactly how that impacts us at this moment for title funds because everything from Title I, Title II, and other title federal grants, many of our districts, probably 25% or more of their funds come from federal grants. So again, we're on edge also too. But my understanding, there's some reports that's supposed to come back and some analysis done by February 10th in order to resume. So as we get more information, we'll get back out to you. I try to give an awareness type email out this morning to superintendents and also to our Board of Education also here too. So as we get more, we'll give more out. Okay. I wish I had more. But even our contacts right now, they're filtering through what exactly this means. Even with for example, our grant, our $55 million grant, the folks that are responsible for those funds and getting those to us, they're trying to wade through all the requirements. Now, with that being said, we're hopeful that this has no impact on school funding and we can move forward as necessary. Number three, for me, we also have been continuing conversations with legislators. I want to take an opportunity to thank our legislators. We've had so many to reach out to us on different topics, everything from student growth. You know, one of the big, when we went through this assessment and accountability process, it was very clear that our school districts, our people, our communities, and a lot of our legislators wanted to move from change to student growth. You know, and we've talked about change versus student growth. So there's been a lot of conversations with legislators on what does that look like? Can we make the change to student growth, no pun intended, to student growth, maybe even with legislation now, even before the new accountability model is ready. So conversations like that are happening, and I really appreciate the fact that legislators are reaching out to us. And I also want to thank the department. Our department has been very flexible and trying to answer those questions. Dr. Perry has been instrumental in coordinating a lot of our efforts, but also too the individual offices have been phenomenal too. So I want to thank the team here. But going back to NTI, there's a lot of discussions on how to handle because this has been an extremely unusual year. For example, we had a high wind day. With hurricanes, we've had flooding, we've had districts that had to call off for it seems like a large number of school violence threats. We've had districts to, of course, with snow and ice. As a matter of fact, many of our districts throughout the state are doing clear roads only because they still can't meet probably maybe even a quarter of their bus routes, and that's throughout the Commonwealth. It's amazing what some snow and some packed ice will do with districts. So with that being said, we have conversations with various legislators about, do we talk about calamity days? Do we talk about more NTI days? Do we talk about moving from the 170-day requirement to the 1,062-hour requirement? So those are the type of things that we're having discussions with, and we're in support of giving districts relief as much as possible. Also, one of the other big topics we talked about funding is, of course, SEEK shortfall. We have met with the Office of the State Budget Director to talk about issues there. We've also met with the A&R chairs, I've spoken personally with McDaniel, Senator McDaniel in Northern Kentucky, and also we met yesterday for probably the third or fourth time with Representative Petrie, who's the chair of the A&R committee also too. Of course, they're not going to commit to, yes, we're going to do this, but it seems like positive conversation. So I'll say that I have hope that we'll get some relief, but we'll see how that works out. And just to remind everyone, the SEEK shortfall, the process for the budget, there is I'll call it a consensus building process with the Office of the State Budget Director. They have economists that look at everything from property value assessments to immigration, large movement of populations to one area to the other. And then we also have our numbers, and it's really a process of trying to extrapolate data to make predictions. You're modeling. This is what the model gives us. This is where we are. And some of the areas that have contributed to a SEEK shortfall this time goes around, for example, AADA and fall growth. Our student attendance is better. That's a good problem to have. But we're looking at a difference of about 4,131 students. So that creates, and then we underestimated. Another one, property assessments. As everyone at this table and a lot of people watching online, I'm sure know, when we overestimate property assessments and those estimates come in lower, that means there's less local effort. There's less local effort, there has to be larger effort from the state level. So that also creates, even though the difference there was 0.27% overall, but you're looking at billions of dollars in property assessment. Probably definitely the largest underestimate that made an impact is the limited English proficiency. We estimated, when I'm talking about talking about the Office of the Budget Director, KDE, and all those that have input, actually 36,849 LEP students. And there's actually 44,814. So again, there was an increase in the estimation, but it was still a miss of about almost 8,000 students. So you're looking at around $2 million of shortfall there. That's a 17.77% difference. So overall, you're looking at $12 million that we are statutorily required to provide districts through AADA and other items. But then there's also the 28 million additional that is as funds are available. We have requested the entire 40 million, just so that you know, we've requested the entire 40 million. And over the years, there's only been 4 SEEK shortfalls since 2010, I want to say. The last one I think occurred either 2016 or 17. And a lot of times districts didn't notice because there was some funds that were moved from one budget, I'll call budget unit, to another, and we're able to handle those type of things. But last year there was a $153 million surplus. The year before, 46 million. So over the past 2 years, over 200 million. And if you go the last 3 years, over 250 million in surplus. And again, those were due to some of the estimation processes that go on. Of course, the General Assembly controls items such as what's the base funding for per student. They also control what exactly is, for example, the SEEK formula itself. Are there certain parts of the formula that there needs to be maybe some adjustments? I think we all could agree there needs to be some adjustment when it comes to special education. And when I say adjustment, turned up when it comes to special education. And of course, our English language learner students. There's so many needs and so much requirements that in order to meet the student needs, it really needs to be adjusted. So there's definitely, I won't say probably, there's definitely some areas that as far as the SEEK formula, but the process itself, there could have been, let's say that legislators gave us $7,000 per student. Without those numbers exactly where they be, there could have still been a shortfall, because those numbers really depend on what the budget looks like. And of course, the General Assembly also has the authority to change those numbers if they so desire. So there's a lot of things that are going on there. But for me, the process itself, over the past 20 years, if you can get within 1% of a budget, we like the surplus better, because that's just a lot better for us. And as a matter of fact, if there's a surplus, I think it was the early 2000s that the last time that surplus was actually raked back to districts. That actually goes back to the state general fund. So again, there's some discussions going on, and I want to thank that our legislators for having those discussions with us as we go through. I'm not saying we agree on everything, but it's great to have those lines of communication open. Also, too, I want to thank, as you know, due to House Bill 825, we are going through an audit here at KDE for various topics, and with those topics, it's taken a lot of time for us to dedicate to have those interviews. As a matter of fact, I've been through 3 interviews myself, and I have at least one more scheduled, if not more. We are looking at this as a way to improve at KDE. And as a matter of fact, we've had a lot of great comments from the APA office on how transparent we've been, a lot of the great things that are not going on at KDE, but also in our districts. And also, too, the willingness of superintendents to be a part of the focus groups. I was told that they've worked with other states where they couldn't fill one focus group. They actually had 4 focus groups that filled within a matter of hours, opened 5 more, and they all filled also, too. I hope that's a good thing. I'm going to take that as a good thing. As our superintendents, I definitely want to make sure that we're doing the best for kids. So I want to say thank you to our people out in our districts, and also to KDE for working with the APA group. A few other minor, I won't say minor, but NAEP results will be released tonight. So look for that press release to come out at 12:01. And also, too, other discussions with legislators will be continuing. So anything that you have as input, I know several of you will text me and say, okay, you need to look at this bill, or there's some other, please keep doing that. And that keeps our eyes open to make sure we don't miss anything. We are tracking, Dr. Perry, how many bills are we tracking right now? Are we 40? We're in the 40s of how many bills that we're tracking to see what impact that makes on education, what input we can provide, just so that you know. That being said, any questions from the group I may answer, or any comments?
We appreciate your efforts, Dr. Fletcher. You're doing a great job, and I was able to attend the GREC Accountability Roadshow, and that was a lot of good feedback, and we appreciate the time and energy that you're putting forward for that. Next on our agenda, we have 2 regulations for our review and action. We welcome Todd Allen from the Office of Legal Services to present proposed amendments to 701 KAR 5055 removal hearing procedures. Welcome.
Morning.
Morning.
Thank you. Sorry, we've got some new technology in this room. It's new to us as well. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I have one regulation before you. It is 701 KAR 5055 removal hearing procedures. The department has a process every 7 years at least. We review all of our regulations to determine whether or not they are in need of amendment. And this one was up for review, and it was determined to be in need of amendment. It's a relatively straightforward and simple amendment. It is to strike local Board of Education members from the language within the regulation. And that's because in 2021, the General Assembly changed the statute related to removal, as some of you all probably know. Previously, the State Board of Education had the authority to remove local Board of Education members from the local board, and the General Assembly struck that from the statute. So we're simply following up in this administrative regulation to reflect that change. So this would only be related to superintendents and other public school officials, and now excludes local Board of Education members. I'll pause there and answer any questions you all may have.
Questions? That it?
That's it.
Great. I would ask the council to entertain a motion to approve the amendments to 701 KAR 5055 removal hearing procedures. Is there a motion?
Move.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? At this time, we will have a roll call vote.
Brandon Alexander,
Yes.
Kirk Biggerstaff,
Yes.
Harry Burchett,
Yes.
Tom Cochran,
Yes.
David Cox,
Yes.
Will Hodges,
Yes.
Sheila Mitchell. Yes. Russ Tilford,
Yes.
David Trimble,
Yes.
Henry Webb.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
Next, we welcome Matt Ross, Che Ritter, and Lindsay Schwartz from the Office of Finance and Operations to present proposed amendment to 702 KAR 5130 vehicles designed to carry 9 passengers or less, standard sport. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Matt Ross. I'm the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Finance and Operations.
Jay Ritter, Division Director, Division of District Support.
And Lindsay Swartz, Policy Advisor.
Joe Shepherd, Pupil Transportation.
So before we start, I know there's a lot of interest in this regulation. And so part of the whole LSAC process is to get it to you all, to receive your feedback. And so we are flexible to hear you, and we want to get the best product possible. So we'll try to walk through this regulation. Where there are areas you have concerns, questions, let's bring them up, and we can, try to hash it out, come to some kind of consensus agreement. And so, like I said, we really just want the best product that gives you all the flexibility you need, sure student safety. So with that said, we'll just sort of walk through here. I know I've heard from a couple superintendents already that they have identified some issues. So we're welcome that discussion. So basically, the reg begins, we'll start with section 1. It's sort of the definition of the non-school bus passenger vehicle. It tracks with the legislation. Section 2 is the alternate transportation plan. It's really a very simplified process. We didn't try to get too much into it. It's you let us know the number of vehicles you're using to transport, and just a statement of why a bus is not practical. The department's always going to say a school bus is safer than a van, right? It's bigger, it's heavier, but wanting to give them enough flexibility, we just need that sort of plan to know what you're kind of doing. So that's the only idea. We're required to have an alternate transportation plan. So this was as simple as we thought we could make it. Section 3, we get into vehicle requirements. Most of these track existing legislation or existing statutes. We did have a question about, so the one of the requirements is sort of that signage about vehicles being used to transport children. We got one question about stopping at railroad crossings. That's an existing statute that talks about buses or any vehicles used to transport kids. So we did add the requirement to have that railroad crossing. And I know there's some confusion as to what that looks like. What does stopping at a railroad crossing look like for a passenger van. You don't have that door to throw open necessarily, but you know, the existing statute already says that. So it's not a new requirement. I'm not sure how other districts work through opening your door. I don't know if it's just opening your driver's door, listening, whatever, but that's an existing requirement. That is not a new requirement, just the signage really is adding that to your vehicles. Then of course, you know, you sell your vehicle or dispose of it to take off your signage like you do for a bus. We do have sort of requirements for, you know, a fire extinguisher, first aid kit, seatbelt cutter, body fluid cleanup, just, you know, you're transporting kids. We just built that in sort of similar to you'd have on a bus. And then the section 4 is your route safety standards, pickup, drop offs. You know, the legislation says you're not to like drop a kid off and have them cross the street. So that's sort of baked in here. No tobacco. And then driver qualifications, legislation requires drug test, driver history record. There's a statute actually that lays out sort of all of these sort of happens if there's an arrest, you know, reporting to your district. So when we get down to 3, we built in an annual medical examination, and that examination is not a CDL examination. That examination is like you do for a new hire, right? It got some feedback that, you know, CDLs, we moved to a 2-year. I think originally it was a 1-year. There was some scheduling issues with those CDLs, being able to get those guys in or women in with a limited number of providers, being able to get them in and get those examinations timely. Sort of heard back that the preference might be to move to a every 2-year for a physical examination. So maybe we pause there and sort of get feedback. I think the goal there is to make sure that if you have some driver driving kids, that driver is medically healthy enough to be driving. So I know that you had some concerns and would rather like to see us move to a once every 2 years sort of medical examination. And I think that's fair. I think we're open to that, but you know, if there's other feedback or thoughts on that.
Yeah, I sent an email with that in there. The question was, why is the standard more higher than that of a normal bus driver? So I think a reasonable person would say if it's the same as a bus driver, that most people would agree with that.
And I think we're open to that. You know, like I said, the issue, I think why we went to the 2-year was around the scheduling of CDLs, making sure timely. So those guys didn't lose their endorsements, but, you know, wanting still to have some mechanism to make sure that, so this isn't a CDL exam. This would just be like a checkup, right? An annual checkup. So if the preference is 2 years, we can definitely make that change. I think that, you know, unless there's thoughts the other way or.
Well, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what the one for bus drivers is 2 years unless there's some kind of issue, and then it
Right.
becomes annual. So what I'm proposing is that it just mirror the
that.
bus driver.
Right.
Well, if there's an issue, then you would have to do it annual.
Okay. I think that we're amenable to that for sure. So, so no other thoughts on that one. I'll keep checking along. The drug testing, that's a statutory requirement. Similar, you know, if they test positive, there's a 5-year ban. And then we get into driver training. And I know we had some questions around that. It calls for a 4-hour initial training and then a subsequent annual 4-hour training. And I think there was questions about sort of that 4-hour recurring annual driver training. And so we talked about it. I didn't really have sort of what they envision, you know, and just thinking about when you're, you know, tossing the keys to somebody to go drive a van, right? Like we all drive cars every day, but you've got these people hauling kids. So, you know, some of the training would be, you know, to deal with, you know, how to skid recovery and stopping steering, wet curves, hydroplaning, sort of safety issues that are a little more advanced with the driving. So I think it envisions this first 4-hour training, and I think you were okay with that one, right? Like it was just the annual update of 4 hours might be a little burdensome. I don't know what, so kind of like to get thoughts on that one too. And I know you suggested just maybe we bake that into the alternate transportation plan where the district would say we're going to do, you know, we're gonna describe our training there, right? Which I think is reasonable, but I mean, I'm open to discussion or thoughts on whether or not you think districts should really create their own annual training, or with some amount of, we could put in there, the annual training must include certain things. I mean,
Well, I'm the one who sent the email, so I'll just say that, and having conversation with our people, the way it was written, the initial was 4-year curriculum provided by KDE. I think most reasonable people would say that's probably a good idea. But then annual, it said it was a local annual training, must be 4 hours. There was no topics that had to be covered. Once again, I've stated many times, these are vans, these are not school buses. The whole purpose of the statute was to provide more flexibility to school districts. And to just arbitrarily require 4 hours with, I mean, as I said in our phone call, our district may want to do 8 hours. Somebody else's district may want to do 2 hours. But if that plan is outlined in our alternate plan, I thought perhaps KDE could say, yes, this is reasonable, or no, that's not reasonable. You're not doing anything. So, but I'm open to whatever. But if you're going to require 4 hours, what is that? I mean, because it's a van, not a school bus. And you all know exactly what school bus training is every summer. It's very specific. It's more CDL geared. These vans do not require CDL license.
right.
And I'll hush.
Maybe I'll let Joe sort of talk to what sort of envision.
So every school bus driver has to complete an 8-hour update in core curriculum, which is our training manual. A van driver could attend 4 hours of that core curriculum or that 8-hour update, because the 8-hour update is mostly driving fundamentals, student management, things that our 4-hour initial training cover. And it's just a lot of it is just a reminder. And it could be tailored to, it's district specific 8-hour update. So not every district has to do things that other districts do, because some districts have issues maybe with backing into mailboxes. So one district may do backing. Other districts may have specific driving, turning, hitting curbs and things. So districts can tailor it to their own problems that they see, but it has to be out of our manual. It has to be core curriculum. And coming to an 8-hour update and staying for 4 hours is what we looked at when we put this together.
So, and I'm okay. If you say it has to be 4 hours, we'll do 4 hours. But I guess the question is, so just if I do 4 hours, our kids are going to be safer. But if I do 3, they may not be as safe. If I do 6, they may be more safer. You're just arbitrarily saying, let's make them go to 4. But I mean, I'm okay with whatever. I just offered a recommendation that it be district, the way the regulation was written, if you read it, it gave district autonomy on training what's in there for, and then had a number of 4 hours. I was just saying, if we're going to give districts autonomy, give them the autonomy to also choose the amount of time. Our district may choose 8 hours, but I'm okay with whatever you all want to do.
For instance, medical training can take an hour or 2, or diastat and things like that. So we look at that as well. That's all core curriculum. So it's anything in the training manual that is core curriculum that districts can choose on what their needs are for that year. And that's what we go by.
If we're looking at section 7 here. And again, we all agree that the specific 4-hour training for each school year, we all very much in agreement. I think the idea there is on line 13 of that page, the training shall include information on the local board's transportation services policy and code of acceptable behavior and discipline. So I guess the question is, does that have to be 4 hours based on district needs, also aligned with our transportation manual for the updates every 4 years? So are we saying that could be up to 4 hours, or it has to be exactly 4 hours each year after the initial?
So I think it would be at least 4 hours, right? I think you could go above and beyond, right? So, we included the information about the local board's transportation services policy and code of acceptable behavior. That any of your training, any of that 4 hours should include that. That was a push that we had a discussion with the sponsor, right? We provided her with a copy of our regulation, and we talked about the legislation. She's very concerned about certain districts not pushing out to their transportation folks the change in law around the transportation services policy and the acceptable end behavior, right? So she was afraid, and I don't think any of the districts in here, but some districts had not made their drivers aware that there'd been a change of law, right? Some of the statutes that were, or the bills that were passed last session around driver safety kind of thing. So that's sort of why we included that any update training, you need to make your drivers well aware of your transportation services policy and your code of acceptable behaviors.
So would it make sense that we look at maybe a minimum of 2 hours or for each district, or a minimum of 4 hours, and then that'd be flexible for the district? You know, because agreed, there's updates, seems like every year. So those updates would have to be, we'd have to go through those. And then anything else that there could be a change in the transportation policy for the district or the code of acceptable behavior. We made changes almost every year in our behavior policy. So those type of training. So are we looking at maybe saying there would be a minimum of 2 hours or a minimum of 4 hours? Thoughts of the group? Or do we want to say it has to be 4 hours?
Well, obviously, I did not think it needed to be, I mean, it's an arbitrary number. I mean, no disrespect, but it's arbitrary. They could have said 6, they could have said 2. The content is more important than the time.
Absolutely.
Is the point I'm trying to make. But if we want to say it's 4, some training 4 hours may be ridiculous, and some may be wonderful 2-hour training. But if it appeases everybody just to say that's be 4 hours, then I'm okay with that. But it's not the time, it's the content. That's the point I'm trying to make.
And I think
I
that
was hoping that it looks like on that second page, it would be more about the training would, of course, we're implying there should be if there's any updates, but also based on the information in the local board's transportation services and code acceptable behavior. So that gives the district some flexibility on what they offer, but I'm sure there'll be some requirements. We just don't have those requirements listed.
you know, and I think it's the district sort of need, right? So what does your district need? What are the problems, sort of like with the buses, right? Or what's in specific needs, like you mentioned, backing, or maybe you have certain terrain conditions or certain situations that are district specific. So if you're having, you know, that I think there's trying to give some flexibility on what you are able to provide. So, I mean, we could just put at least 4 hours that includes the training on your code of behavior.
Well, here's a great example. As a former superintendent, we were struggling with special needs populations on our buses. So we catered a 2-hour training each year that was just specific to special needs because our bus drivers appreciated that so much. And they actually had they had contact directly with my director of special ed. And so she provided training each year. And I think every year is 2 hours specifically on special education topics. Whereas other districts may not have those similar issues. That gives them some flexibility because it goes back to their local board transportation services policy. And as you said, issues that you may be having. One year we had an inordinate amount of discipline referrals compared to others. So we did some training with bus drivers on how it relates to discipline referrals. So some flexibility with the understanding if there's updates, everybody would understand there'd have to be some training on updates. So flexibility with particular requirements when it comes to updates and things of that nature, I think would make sense.
I do have a question. Is the CPR training part of that 4-hour, or is it in addition to the 4-hour? It's the next line down under
I
3.
think that is included in the initial 4 hours.
So it's part of the 4-hour.
First aid CPR is in that initial training.
Okay.
So if you had to renew your certificate, you could do that in your update, right? Your annual update.
If you require a renewal and you require a certificate, that could be.
Not all districts do that.
Not all
Certificates
districts
are not
do that.
required.
Right. All districts are required to provide initial first aid and CPR training, but there's by an approved instructor under the current regulation, but they don't have to have a card or a certification Right. because of the cost.
Commissioner, if I could, I'm okay with the flexibility that's in here if we're going to keep the 4 hours. I mean, right now, it basically says it's up to the local.
Mhm.
So if you're going to require the 4 hours, I would ask that we not change the language and make it more restrictive to start adding components if we're going to truly make it about the local issues. And I agree. I wish we could take reverse out of school buses.
I agree.
So And I think that's perfectly fine too. I agree that we have to have some flexibility because there's different issues facing all of us. So I think the flexibility there and that line that follows gives us that. So requiring the 4 hours, but up to, in addition to any type of updates that are come down, but local transportation policy, local other local issues that may arise.
Marching on. Section 8, we talk about insurance requirement of the statute. Section 9 is the vehicle inspections. We required, there's always been the 30-day requirement to have the van checked by a service professional. We have a pre and post. We envision a pre and post inspection trip. So your driver comes out, they do some kind of walk around, some kind of some checking of the equipment, make sure everything works prior to the trip. So we did receive some questions about sort of what was included in that inspection, that pre and post trip inspection. And there's a form, right? And I think there were some questions around really I don't know if you so under that first engine compartment, there was some items there for an engine belts, power steering belt, water pump belt, alternator belt. And I think, so there was some question whether or not that was really more advanced than the average driver that gets in and out of that. I think envisioned in some of the training was how to go through that. We're open to, if you all had a chance, I know you've had a chance to look and sort of say some of this seems a little bit onerous or a little bit too advanced. But I thought I'd give Joe sort of the ability, if you want to talk about sort of that inspection, the pre and post trip inspection. And
That would be included in the training, initial 4-hour training. Knowing your vehicle. But this shouldn't take more than 5 minutes to do it. You're just making sure that the fluids are up, the belts are tight, and mostly it's just visual mostly. And you walk around and check all these items to make sure they're there. And a walk around, you just want to make sure that nothing happened en route when you get back. You want to make sure that there's no damage to the vehicle. And look at the tires. I tell people that the post trip, you can find issues with vehicles that, for instance, you might have a nail in a tire on a post trip. You don't want to get up the next morning and get on the vehicle and have a flat tire. If you saw it that afternoon when you walked around, you could have got it fixed. But this is mostly just a walk around, minus checking under the hood, checking your lights, mirrors. It's very basic. This is much more basic than a school bus free trip.
So once again, I was the one that sent the email and talked about this. So two things I would say. First, I sent a copy. I just removed some of the redundancies because it was obvious some of this was cut and pasted, like mirrors was on there a couple times.
Yeah.
Turn signals was in 2 or 3 different locations. We want to make this as easy, or I guess easy is not the word, as efficient for drivers. We can't find drivers now. The reason the statute was passed was to give districts more flexibility. And the last thing we want to do is ask somebody to check turn signals in 3 different columns. So that was one of the things I want to point out. But my big concern, my director tells me, and perhaps you know all the vehicles, I don't know, but some of the items on here, in non-commercial vehicles, you may have to remove some things to see that belt. So if you're telling me I have to see the alternator belt and I got to have a wrench to take something loose to see that, there's no way that's efficient or appropriate. He tells me in non-commercial vehicles, all of these belts is not as visible as you're making it sound. I don't know. I'm not a mechanic.
That's possible. Well, there's many different vehicles out there. Some you can see and some you can't. We could put non-applicable, maybe, if you can't see it. You're not going to be required to, if you can't see it, you can't see it. So, but some vehicles you can.
Well, but if you can't, and you put it in a regulation,
Yeah, it's going to be.
Technically, I'm going to tell my person, if you can't see that belt, you don't roll that van or that SUV. So that's reasonable people would say, if I went around the room and asked everybody in here, and I know that's part of the training, But surely I'm not going to ask our people to take a lug nut loose and look under a piece of plastic to see a belt before they take a trip. I mean, we're just not going to do that.
So, I mean,
That's-
we could update this. So, I want to make sure, did you have this one? Because we did try to go through and make sure that any okay. So we'll make sure that, because we did try to make sure that there was no redundancies, no, cut and paste. I know Lindsay checked it pretty thoroughly, so, but we could add a column that says, if it's not visible, some way to say, like a not applicable, right? I can't, if a alternator belt is not visible for some reason because it's covered by some type of, engine housing or whatever, that you just have a not applicable,
If you've done it like you've done the other ones, it says if equipped, if it said alternator belt, if visible,
if visible.
yeah, then it takes care of.
Right.
We can do that.
Okay, I've got a question. So was the intent of this new legislation to strengthen regulations as far as like school vans and non-student, or are we just putting forth stricter
So,
requirements? Because we've been transporting in my district for years without any issue or problem whatsoever. So I was just wanting to know the background here.
right, so I think it was prior to, vans were used generally not for daily transport. And I think that the legislation was envisioning that because of the lack of drivers, districts are going to look at options to transport kids for daily routes. So I think that sort of changed the equation. So how do you put into structure? While you do it for one reason, you may use it for your golf team to go to golf
Right.
matches, right? But
Uh-huh.
another district's using it to run daily routes, right? So it gave them the ability to do that, but it also had requirements that we come up with more of a framework for how that operates and how that should operate. So we are not going beyond anything that legislation is, the enacting legislation has given us authority to. And we're trying to do it in a way that is the least burdensome as possible. But also now we've got, we're not just using them for activities, we're doing to and from. So it's hard to get a one size fits all. It's hard to break that apart. You're still using these vans to take kids places. So, I mean, we're not trying to strengthen the regulation around it. We're trying to create the regulation around to allow districts to do this day to day, following the guidance of the enacting statute.
And to add to that, it's like optional capacity for some districts, those that are having trouble finding drivers, severe shortage or emergency shortage. That was an issue, obviously, a couple months ago. And I think this was to help kind of firm up that regulatory part of that, instead of, JCPS uses them every day and you're using them for extracurricular activities only.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows that you do it a little differently there than Boone does or than Campbell does. The need and use is going to be very different. So I think that's what this reg was trying to do, is kind of just put some guardrails up. And the sponsor, the intent was to obviously, not just kind of say, well, if it's a van, just go out there and drive it. Because I think it's going to be used differently in different districts.
And correct me if I'm wrong, these pre-trip, post-trip, what we're talking about is making the changes that make it more applicable to passenger vans.
Yes.
So the recommendations that have been made here, they really need to be more applicable to passenger vans. But regardless of the type of vehicle, there has to be a safety inspection every 30 days. That's a bit more thorough. So it's not like we're just removing inspections. What we're saying is those 30-day inspections are still required, but these pre-trip, post-trip needs to be more applicable to the type of vehicle that we're using.
There was an existing form on that, right?
There was.
So we're cleaning up that existing form, which may knock out a lot of those duplications you see. So we're trying to clean it up, make the form simpler, make it as applicable to vans and non-commercial vehicles as possible. Willing to hear you all on your concerns about what that looks like. So
I think the question before the group, are we comfortable with the changes that we've discussed so far, moving forward with this, with the understanding that we're making those changes, or would this group prefer that we bring this back for support before the next board meeting? So we can still have it off the,
Can I ask a
back.
clarifying question?
Sure.
To your point, so this talked about the alternate transportation plan. Does this regulation apply to my district if we're transporting kids to and from school, or does it also apply to all usage of vans now?
It applies to all uses of vans.
And perhaps that's a good point, Henry, because in my district, I don't use non-bus vehicles to transport kids daily, but I do use that for extracurricular activities like golf or, tennis or some of the small group activities. And I think that you're speaking to the fact that we need some framework here because districts are going to be using more non-buses to transport kids on a daily basis. So maybe that's a good point.
I think the regulation actually talks about transporting to and from school, regardless if that's a daily or if they're going to, if you're going to an extracurricular trip, that's to and from school also too.
So maybe should there be a difference in?
So the statute 156, 153 says districts may also use vehicles owned, leased, or contracted by the district that were designed and built by the manufacturer for passenger transportation of 9 or fewer passengers, including the driver, for transporting students to and from school and approved school activities under an alternate transportation plan approved by the Kentucky Department of Education.
And approved school activities.
It's all captured there. And I get that. That's something we've wrestled with, right? So now it's an extra step for your activities, right? And maybe that was not the intent, but that's the legislation that we got. So we're trying to, and I'm torn between it too, right? You want to make sure that if your golf coach is taking your golf team, that he's or she is healthy and can do all the things that a driver on a regular day would be, but it's also more, on that sense, it's a little more burdensome than probably the way you've been doing it. So we're cognizant of that. I don't know that there's a easy fix for that, or a carve out.
You keep referencing vans. Are we including cars and Suburbans in this? Because
Yeah, it's actually any vehicle that you can use, a 9-passenger or less vehicle. So that's really what Suburbans.
Anything that's being used to transport students.
I will yield to the will of the group, but I just want to reiterate what we said. I think the intent of the legislation, because I personally had conversations about trying to get some flexibility with vans, was to provide flexibility, more opportunities for districts. I get the issue with safety, but I believe that we went a little bit too far personally, because these individuals have Kentucky driver's license, legal. They had to pass a test. They have to have physical when they're hired. These are not CDLs. These are not buses. So while I appreciate the attempt, and I'm all for safety, that's our number one priority. We talk about it all the time. I believe personally we went a little bit too far, but I will support it with the information that's been shared if everybody else does.
If you can provide some clarification for me, one prime example of the use of a non-bus or a 9-passenger or less vehicle is our current weather situation. A lot of districts are not running routes that they can't either get their buses up, or they can't. The turnabouts are a problem. For us, turnabouts were a major problem. So this is a prime example of where you might be able to use a 9-passenger or less vehicle in place of a road that you can't get a bus up to turn around. But if I'm not mistaken, it used to be part of regulations years ago, and it may still be that districts actually contracted with local citizens to transport students out of very long roads, way up in the mountains, places that were often dirt roads or gravel roads, and sometimes creek beds that you obviously can't get a vehicle up and down without a certain vehicle. So is that still availability still in current regulation to do that? And what type of guidelines or checks are on those vehicles or those processes?
Well, yeah, I think you can still contract with a driver, some outside entity, whether that is a individual driver or a company, right? But they're still going to have to their contract is going to have to reflect the requirements of the regulation and the statutes, the applicable statutes. And that I don't believe is really a new requirement. That the contract would always have to reflect that. You couldn't engage them to drive without them meeting the requirements of the law. You can't use that as, some workaround, but,
Okay, we have some online who have raised their hands. I'll start off with Russ Tilford.
Good morning, and I apologize for not being able to attend in person today, but I do have a couple questions. Start with section 3 on the vehicle requirements. Was there a safety change made by manufacturers that reflects the May 1st, 2018 date that is in the regulation?
yeah, I think that's the date that backup cameras were required for vans.
Okay, thank you. I was unclear of that requirement. We do have some a little bit older vehicles that are well maintained and still very reliable that we do use for student activities. And our situation is somewhat similar to Kirk's. Our primary issue of non-school bus vehicles is our student activities. It's not the day-to-day transportation, although we have had to use those in a couple of situations this year where we just did not have enough substitute drivers to run all of our routes. We did supplement with Suburbans on those days. So that's a concern there. Just the fact that we still have very reliable vehicles. If the backup camera is the issue, would an add-on backup camera be satisfactory to allow us to continue to use a vehicle that perhaps was manufactured prior to that 2018 date?
I mean, I think it would be. I don't even know that I don't know that a backup camera would absolutely be required. I think that was sort of the thinking around it was to try to have that as an extra safety thing. So, I mean, I think as long as your vehicle is able to pass that safety, your safety inspection by your mechanics or whatever, I would be okay with taking that out. At this point, if that helps. And as long as they can pass a safety inspection, I don't think that it absolutely has to have a backup camera. I think that was aimed at really with the vision of a bigger district, and a big district using these daily is giving them as much protection as they could. But
We don't require it for buses, right?
no, not backup. But I think we can strike that one if that's agreeable. If that helps you out, we're happy to do that.
I think across the Commonwealth, that will allow us to keep several vehicles in place in transporting students, particularly for activities. Again, a day-to-day vehicle, a newer one might be more practical. I do appreciate some of the discussion today. I still have concerns that there are some unintended consequences from the General Assembly, and I really, if there's not an urgency, encourage us to maybe hit the pause button and go back and share the concerns with the General Assembly as they reconvene next week, I guess, or real soon, so that they may have an opportunity to clarify and bring some changes that would help us to make this more efficient for our districts as we move forward, particularly in the scope of student activities. I get a day-to-day vehicle use for transporting students to and from school as a regular route in lieu of a school bus likely needs a more stringent requirement. But for our golf team, our academic team, our small groups of students that go on an afternoon trip, this is a little bit of a stretch for our drivers that are classroom teachers in many cases. I just hope that we can find some approach there for our student activities more so than the day-to-day. But I do appreciate everyone's comments today.
So I will say we did have a conversation with the sponsor, and we're getting prompted to sort of bring the regulation forward. So there is a little bit of a push to get this in place so that districts can take advantage of that alternate transportation plan. That right now, there's just not a process for that. So, but we would be happy to work with you, think about how to try to make it more flexible, how to seek. If there's some carve out we need to seek with the General Assembly, we would be open to trying to come up with something as long as we can ensure the safety of the student and flexibility. I'm sure we'd be happy to help you with discussions or do whatever we can on that. But on that front, but I do think we need to try to move the regulation forward. And if there is a change, we would amend it, obviously. And if it's a required statutory change, we might be able to get like an emergency regulation to move it faster. But I do think we want to move forward to enable districts to take advantage of the alternate transportation plan, which at this point, because we don't have a process for it, you can't use. So
Okay, we've got some more online. Tom Cochran, David Trimble, do you all have something to say?
Yeah, this is Dave Trimble. I didn't mean to raise both hands. I don't know the equipment I'm using. I think two comments, and they both kind of already been made. I do think that if we allow flexibility with the training, I do think it would be really nice to at least have a sample agenda for us to give our driver trainers. They get a much different training on the school bus than on a car. And my district currently doesn't have vehicles, but I was transportation director in my previous district, and we did. And honestly, we felt like we trained pretty successfully in about an hour and a half, and because everybody there felt pretty comfortable with that vehicle. And I appreciate the conversation. There are some things we need to look at. The other thing I would just say is kind of my concern is what we have used these vehicles for all these years. It's kind of like what both Kirk and Russ said, is for extracurriculars. And so I think we're using them for a different process now. And it is different. To pick up a student at a house is different than taking a kid from the school to the golf course. And so I do think there's significant unintended consequences to this, because I think that I remember the number of people we had, a coach who would drive a car, the additional paperwork that now is going to be a responsibility and a legal liability of the transportation department, the additional physical paperwork, the additional training paperwork. We always did motor vehicle checks. We always tried to make sure everybody was a sound driver. But I would just, I think you guys, I love the regulation and the work you've done. And thank you for that. I do worry that if we try to apply this as one size fits all to both using it as a daily route vehicle and a daily route driver, and using it as someone who is just going to help us alleviate transportation, because a lot of our districts are dealing with finding somebody to drive that evening route. And so if we now have a coach who can't come and take a look at the van and get in it and drive the kids without having already done 4 hours worth of training, had another physical, that they've been employed with us, but so now they have to have another one. We're going to be a lot shorter in people who are available and capable. We're falling just short of making them go get a CDL, and we're having trouble finding people willing to do that. Those are my concerns for districts. I don't know that there's anything we can do based on the current regulation, but maybe that's a conversation we could have with the legislature. I just think it's going to really hurt how people have been using it for years in an attempt to try to ease another process. And I do have some concern with that, but I know it may not be something we can fix.
Yeah, I mean, we totally understand.
Did Tom have anything to add to that? Okay, Will Hodges, did you have something?
Yes, like probably some of you do, I have my CDL and drive a bus route occasionally. So I understand the importance of safety. I certainly do, like most of you have spoken of. But our district, like many of you, we periodically use a contracted van for an activity. It just makes more sense from time to time for us to do that. We don't own any, but sometimes we will contract one for an activity. I do feel like this regulation has went too far. I feel like if this goes forth as written, I think it will cut all of that out in our district, where we will not contract. It just doesn't make sense. I don't see anyone doing the training to that extent. Like someone mentioned, these people, they don't have their CDL, and it's a balance, because I do understand the importance of safety. But I just wonder, could we bring this back? I think Commissioner mentioned this, Commissioner Fletcher, bring this back next meeting before we actually vote on it, and try to work through some of these things, maybe send some feedback. I did have a specific question on Section 9, just because we do contract. So if we contract a van, and I know safety inspections are needed every once safety inspection shall be performed no less than once every 30 days. And that's what we do on vehicles that we own, obviously. But let's say we contract one and it's coming from the place that we contract it from. Does that need to go, the way it's written, does that need to go to our bus garage before it goes on the road?
So the statute 189-540 says the regulation covering the operation shall by reference be made part of any contract with the school district. Every school district and private contractor referred to under this subsection shall be subject to those regulations. So that van would either need to have had a acceptable safety inspection within 30 days, or it would need to be inspected by your inspector before traveling, I think. I mean, I don't know that it has to, as long as that the inspection it's had within 30 days meets the requirements of the regulation, to be fine without having to re-inspect it. But if you don't know, or if it hasn't been inspected, then it would have to be inspected before it goes on the road.
But we could get that inspection from the place it was contracted from if it's acceptable.
Right.
Okay.
David Cox, did you have something to say?
Yes, I didn't, not to open a can of worms, but it's kind of what they were just speaking about. We have 3 or 4 vehicles that we use in that capacity to haul small groups and things of that nature, like everybody else. But we farm out. We don't have a bus garage, so I'm taking my vehicles down to Boyd Cat or Wayne Supply to get inspected. Many times we're taking vehicles down there that have had 15 miles put on them that month. And you know, we're writing a check for $1,000 to get these things done every month. Is there any discussion? Has there ever been any discussion as far as come up with some type of a mileage time factor coefficient, if you will, that if this vehicle wasn't used since the last time it was inspected, is there a way of not having to do that again and constantly paying that fee? I mean, obviously times there's 2,000 miles in a month, and there's other times there's 10.
Yeah, I think
I'll get off and listen, but I appreciate the consideration. Or just every time we write that check, it kind of bothers me.
I get, yeah, I totally understand that. The way that legislation was written is it just requires it on a monthly basis. So there was no carve out or any kind of exception there for the amount of use. But it's statutory requirement that it's inspected by a trained inspector within every 30 days.
So did they?
I guess my point, I'm sorry. I guess my point was, you know, those odometers, nobody's going to mess with an odometer. And that's a pretty fair statement. I think that if we can look at those odometers and it's under 50 miles, we would never get our personal car that we put our own kids in inspected that often, which I guess my question is just trying to save a little money. I mean, we spend a lot more time on a lot less monetary type of transactions. And you know, the guy told me the last time, he goes, well, I took it down to drop it off. And he says, hey, if you want to hang around, said it's only got 30 miles on it. I'll have it done here in about 10 minutes. And I'm writing the check, you know? So I just didn't know if that's something we could even consider, but it's always been kind of a burr in my saddle. I thought I'd bring it up. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, and I'm not trying to be adversarial, I'm just asking, when legislation is written, often they ask for your KDE's thoughts on guidance. So when we say that was in the legislation, was it recommended that it be 30 days? Would 60 days work if we can get legislation changed?
So,
I'm just asking.
Well, in the case of a school bus, has to be inspected every 30 days that is being used to transport students. When we go and review district paperwork, and buses have their own folders with the bus numbers on them, and if it wasn't used in July or August, or there wasn't an inspection done, we just ask for you to put something in there. Why? Maybe it was in the shop for 30 days and it couldn't be. It was being worked on, or it just wasn't being used. And if you're saying the vans weren't used at all that month, that might fall in line with the way we work with our school districts with school buses, possibly.
So I'm looking at the statute here, and it says non-school bus passenger vehicles used under this subsection shall be clearly marked transporting students and undergo a safety inspection no less than once every 30 days. So it was probably built in there to mirror the bus language, but without really thinking about, you know, the additional costs, whether or not they're not used regularly. You know, trying to.
We appreciate the work that you've done.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure.
Know that.
yeah.
We're
no,
just.
yeah,
I wasn't being,
Get as efficient
we're here
as
to have this
possible.
conversation. Thank
So,
If I may, that's what the LSAC process is about. That's what we're here for, is to, because sometimes when you see a statute and or regulation, there's some unintended consequences that district people are going to see that maybe we don't. But also too, we also are trying our best to adhere to what the statute requires. So balancing, first of all, everybody here is about child safety, every single person. And there's not anything that we would do to endanger a child's life. Not one single person at the table or anywhere else. But also too, we have to balance that with our not taking away the student safety, but also include making sure we're meeting the statute requirements. Now, it is very clear that there's some things that we have gone over when it comes to what's the statutory requirement with this regulation. My suggestion, if it pleases the chair, is that we get together maybe with some of your transportation directors and you personally, and even talk with the bill sponsor about what's in the bill or what was in the statute, and see how we can move forward. So I think right now the best process for us is to bring all these out. For example, Superintendent Cox, I never would have thought about a bus not being used for maybe only 15 miles. That's not something I would have thought of. And the reason why, we never used buses as a superintendent in Lawrence County. Vans. We didn't use passenger vans. So those 9 vans, those 9 passenger vans, we wouldn't have thought of that. So that's the whole point of this LSAC process, is to have this working through. And most of the time that, the regulations that we bring forward, we have questions, we're able to adapt that and move forward. But I think this is a prime example for us to push the brakes. There is a session coming up, a resuming of the session in February, talking with the bill sponsor, and then see how we can move forward. So I think if Matt, with our group and OFO, we could have a couple of people to work with, maybe a couple of transportation directors that you may recommend, maybe even superintendents here, and then also talk to the bill sponsor and get a meeting together to discuss. Or is everybody okay? I mean, superintendents, I feel like that's a good path
I think
forward.
that's good. Do we need a motion on that? Or just?
We're not going to, I guess we're just going to table the regulation is essentially what we're doing. So, Glyptis, would there be anything else that we would need to do? Since we're just going to table Todd. But
We will table that and address it at the next meeting.
I'll make the motion.
Okay. Motion.
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote.
If we could, we might go ahead and compile a list of sort of the things we've discussed today, and then we can circulate that among LSAC group and see if there are additions or clarifications there, and just so
That'd be great.
So we have a little bit more clarity on. Forward. So
Thank you.
thank you all.
thank you all.
Roll call vote.
Brian Alexander,
We're voting here to table.
table. Yes. sir.
Yes.
Kirk Biggerstaff,
Yes.
Harry Burchett,
Yes.
Tom Cochran,
Yes.
David Cox,
Yes.
Will Hodges,
Yes.
Sheila Mitchell,
Yes.
Russ Tilford,
Yes.
David Trimble,
Yes.
Henry Webb.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Thank you. To conclude our meeting, Dr. Robbie Fletcher, Dr. Jennifer Stafford, and Karen Dodd from the Kentucky Department of Education will provide an update on the Kentucky United We Learn Assessment and Accountability Framework 2.0.
As our group gets settled in, going back to talking about our town halls. Town halls have been great. I think that we've had a lot of great input from the people that have joined. As a matter of fact, in our 4 town halls we've done, and we've probably had around, I would say, approaching 200 or so people that have been there. So it's also Karen Dodd, who is our chief performance officer, and also Jennifer Stafford. We saw Rhonda Sims and her group and OAA. There's been a lot of work that's been put into this and a lot of listening. So very excited where we are now, and we want to bring you up to an update at this point. So I'll turn it over to our ladies at the table.
Well, good morning, and thank you all very much for attending the board member directors meetings at the different co-ops and attending the town halls. We really appreciate your superintendent support and feedback on the proposal that we have in front of you. It is, we've got a presentation, and So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to talk first about a little bit about the details of the framework, and then go into the feedback from the town halls and give you an update of kind of where we are in the process and then what we are hearing. To start out, we have the framework 2.0 includes areas of that we're moving toward as far as new systems. We're talking about assessment systems. We're talking about accountability systems to encourage the progression or more vibrant learning experiences within our schools. We realize there's really good things happening across the Commonwealth in the schools, and the systems are built to encourage that and spread the vibrant learning experiences. One of the pieces that we've had most support on is the collaboration, the support in having partnerships across districts, and we talk with as we are describing the framework and bringing together districts that have similar demographics, similar challenges, and providing opportunities for them to collaborate together. And that has been a really one of the major pieces that have been supported and really well received from superintendents. Doing away with the color system that we currently have and moving toward that collaboration is a very supported idea within the framework. With the local piece around the local accountability and involving and engaging our stakeholders, that's another piece that is really well received. And as Dr. Fletcher mentioned, we've had a really good number of stakeholders coming out from parents, from business community members, from educators in the town hall. And Karen has details around that. But having districts engage their communities is a really popular as well and really well received as part of the new framework. And then that support, again, in supporting each other and moving toward a more prosperous Kentucky is where the direction we all want to go. So in the details, so I know each of you all have heard this and we've been to your co-op. So just to jump into the details on the next slide. Again, we believe that in Framework 3.0, we'll update this graphic to have two pieces instead of three pieces of the puzzle. One will be federal and then one will be local. So if you think about these three pieces, the one on the top right being federal measures that have statewide that will be common to all of our schools and districts. First, the accountability piece of focusing on indicators in reading and math, the individual student growth that we've talked about that has been widely supported from the beginning of the discussions, and then no changes to transition readiness, graduation rate, or the English language progress. Nor the climate and safety survey. We heard very clearly that student voice was part of an important piece in having school accountability and that reflection of their voice in those. Then different from Framework 1.0, that science assessment, and we heard clearly from this body that science assessment should not be part of accountability, yet reported, and as federally required, it must be assessed with a common measure and reported. And we heard from LSAC, the Cool Council, as well as the Kentucky Board of Education, that they wanted the science assessment to be tested and reported, but yet not in that federal accountability piece.
And if I may add, I think that gives us a great opportunity to focus on science separately, because we obviously need to review in our curriculum, our assessment, and the situation that we have with our science overall throughout our state. But by removing that and having it reported separately, this gives us an opportunity to just focus on science in a way that we can make those changes. And then eventually, if that wants to be a part of the accountability model, we can talk about that later on. But I think I like the idea of being able to pull out science and talk about that individually and the issues that we have there without saying, how does this impact the CSI, TSI, ATSI status for a school? So again, just as Dr. Stafford's pointing out, we have streamlined the federal buckets. I don't think we could streamline this anymore as far as that's concerned. But also, as she's pointed out so well in all of our town halls, the science is part of assessment, but it's not a part of the federal accountability. We still have the assessment. We're holding ourselves accountable because of the work that we need to do there, but that's still not part of that federal portion of the overall rankings for, identification of CSI, TSI, and ATSI schools.
So with the federal piece that comes with the identification of our schools in need of support, we want those to be standard. We want those to be the same measure, the same pieces with school accountability so that there's not any variance from that identification of our schools in need of support. And so again, that the change from 1.0 to 2.0 was the switch of the science assessment and the climate and safety survey, because you'll recall that the science was part of the federal identification in 1.0. With 2.0, after your feedback and others, then that has been switched. So we're listening and we're responding to the voices that we're hearing. In one other comment about the science assessment that's in Framework 2.0 is that there would be assessments 3 through 10 for in those off grades that could be utilized for instructional purposes, as well as our local accountability. So the current framework has science being assessed at 5, 8, and 10. And again, that's a little different than we have currently, because currently science is assessed at 4, 7, and 11. And so we're thinking that it could move to those upper grades and have more opportunities for instruction in science, as well as then those pieces at those off grade levels. But again, only the 5, 8, and 11 would be then utilized for that common piece. Looking at then the other two pieces, and again, this will be combined into one piece in Framework 3.0, choice measures that would be for utilization within your local accountability. So the top left piece would be required to be in your local accountability measure, but how you get there has some flexibility to it. First is social studies and writing. In Framework 2.0, social studies and writing will have assessments provided by the state for you to utilize in your classrooms and within your local accountability systems. Or if you have a competency-based or authentic demonstration of learning for science, or for social studies and writing, you may utilize that. So it's not a question of whether or not social studies and writing is required to be in your local accountability system, because it is. The option there is what you put into that local accountability measure, whether it's the state provided or your own authentic demonstration of those knowledge and skills. So that's really different than what we currently have, because at this point we do not have any opt-in assessments. Everything we have currently is required by the state, that the state administers. Science, social studies and writing, is again, that's a shift out of the federal identification over to local, and then having that opt-in piece. The other piece of that would be required in local accountability is your vibrant learning experiences. And the Kentucky United We Learn Council's Accelerating Innovation Standing Committee developed a menu of options on how to demonstrate vibrant learning experiences that include things like student defenses, capstone projects, other things of that nature. And they also have an opportunity for districts to develop their own vibrant learning experiences that, and again, be included in your accountability system. So again, it's included in your local accountability system. How you get there then is your local decision. And this could be start out as just a percentage of students engaged in vibrant learning experiences, or or you could switch after some experience with that to be the quality of your vibrant learning experiences. So again, local options and flexibility there. And the final piece of the choice measure would be our interim assessments. And this is one of the components that has gotten the most conversation and where we're looking for your feedback is currently in Framework 2.0. We heard from our stakeholders that 67% of respondents to our survey said we're willing to give up our local interim measures. At our local co-op meetings for hearing from our superintendents that may not be as easily given up or relinquished as the survey had said. So currently in 2.0, it has that the state will develop an interim system for reading and math that could be administered in the fall and winter and be aligned to the summative assessment. Now, the summative assessment would be required, reading and math, in the spring, as it currently is. The interim assessments then would be aligned to that summative assessment based on the Kentucky the Kentucky academic standards. So it would be an aligned system that would help with information instructionally to prepare for that summative assessment.
And one of the comments that came out with one of our superintendent groups is if we're looking at these interim assessments, could we have an assessment system that would be aligned K through 8? So even incorporating kindergarten, first and second grade, not just 3 through 8. And so that was one of the things we didn't think about, because it would make sense if you're going to use our interim assessments that are aligned. And again, some other things that we've been discussing, first of all, we are required to assess state standards. So there would be a core piece of these interim assessments that is state standards. Wrapped around that would be some flexibility, the adaptability pieces that can say, if a student gets something correct versus incorrect. So we have the state standards being assessed, but also have those wraparound pieces that would help us better identify grade level equivalency, and then be more adaptable to if a student is, if they're in the third grade and they're assessing on the 4.5 reading level, we would be able to identify that with this type of, and again, those assessment systems are also being discussed. I think Alaska is one of the states that was talking about an assessment system like that. But again, we heard very loudly and clearly, even though 70, I think it's 60, almost 68% of the people that responded to our survey stated that they would be willing to go to the interim assessments that we provide and move away from their MAP STAR. But when we got in talking with the co-ops and those directors, a lot of them felt strongly that they've invested so much time in their iReady MAP, from NWA, Curriculum Associates, and other groups, that they would like to continue. So we still feel strongly that it's up. We need to give the opportunity for instructional data on a regular basis so that the teachers can respond. But we also want it to give the same level of instructional material that you're getting now with the systems you're using. So that RFP that we put out would have all that type of information built in, and then we'd have a group. And again, it could be any company. It could be Pearson, it could be Curriculum Associates, NWA, or one that I don't even think of could bid in to say, okay, we can handle all this, and this would be the price. So it made sense. That's why these town halls and these co-op meetings are going on to, if we look at interim assessments, how much would it cost to go through a K through 8 system with the interim assessments? that are aligned with our content standards, but also two that provide a summative assessment that assesses our standards so that we can go through our federal process. So again, the summative assessments are not opt-in. As a matter of fact, right now in 2.0, we didn't have the interim assessments opt-in either. So after listening, that's what we're looking at for 3.0. So that, you know, as we go through, and some districts may want to say, okay, let's see how there may be some pilot districts that go through the interim assessments, and we'd have to survey because there's how much is that going to cost? We'd have to see how many districts want to get in the beginning and see when people want to opt in. One of the big questions that someone asked at one of the says, well, how often would we have to commit? I would assume it'd have to be 2 years because of the budget, how the budget flows, and we'd have to have a commitment from 2 years from districts on opting in at the very least, and then going from there. So if you'll notice, this is different. It's giving opt-in options. Even in social studies and writing, we know that there's districts that are doing such a great job with their portrait of a learner or other measures where they're, and maybe it's even higher level coursework in social studies. Maybe it's, if anybody has some PTSD,
Don't say
maybe
it.
some districts are doing portfolios in writing. They believe in them. Maybe they do. But whatever assessment that they're using that is that's measuring the student performance, that's up to them. But we're also providing, if you're not ready for that, we have opt-in assessments that we were proposing that would measure 3 through 8 for social studies and writing. So that way you have that you can use in your local accountability. So the big change that we're looking at too, as far as the graphic, really those two pieces on the left, if you will, the teal and the sea foam, I guess you could say, the two that are not navy. We've toyed with the colors of what to call these, but the two that are not navy, those are really part of one local accountability system for districts. The top left are measures that have to be part of it. You know, we've even talked about vibrant learning. How does that look? Are you going through a system? How do you determine that locally? What is vibrant learning and how do you assess it? What does that look like locally? Some districts may have a system similar to transition readiness where, you know, we offer defenses of learning or we offer capstone projects or internships, or the list goes on what vibrant learning looks like. How many of our students are participating in that? Then it could also move into, again, leaving it up to districts, what's the quality of that vibrant learning? You could determine what does the quality of vibrant learning look like. So how you assess that vibrant learning is we're trying to leave as much flexibility to districts as possible, just making sure it's a requirement. So if you can see the opt-in portions here is very different. But again, it's giving districts as much flexibility as possible. Then the local accountability piece, I think.
And the local accountability piece gives the autonomy and flexibility for our districts to determine the priorities of their communities. So they could align their local accountability system to their portrait of a learner, because we understand that the students that we are preparing, we're preparing them for a world that's unknown. We don't know what it's going to be like in 50 years or 4 years for that matter. But we have to prepare our students to be critical thinkers, to be collaborators, and to be able to be successful in a future that we don't know and we can't define what it looks like. So engaging in our communities and developing those priorities around the local accountability piece is important. And what we're seeing a lot of examples to our districts that have been partnering with us in these town halls who have done an excellent presentation and engaged their communities, and they're bringing those stories and their examples to the town halls. And I can't thank all of our districts enough for the work that they're doing and then sharing at the town halls around. So they're bringing their examples of how they are utilizing their local accountability systems. And then you've seen the last my last slide here with the phased in approach that will meet districts where they are, because all of our districts are at different places. We have some districts that are on track now that have their own local accountability system, others that are developing it, but then other districts that haven't even thought about engaging in this type of work. So really trying to put a phased in approach with starting with a pilot, allowing allowing schools to work with each other to develop those and learn so that they're not having the same obstacles, and we can learn from each other. And then expanding that to other districts. So at this point, we want to turn it over to Karen just for some updates around how the town halls have been going.
Yeah. So you can go to the next slide, please. We've completed our first 4. I know you have 6 on there. We actually put this together for the board, so the last 2 will be done tomorrow and Thursday. But the first one, Central Kentucky Educational Co-op, we featured Woodford County as the district to present there. We had about 95 attendees, so really good attendance at that one. On January 16th, we had another Kentucky Valley Education Co-op with Floyd County presenting there, and about 40 participants. On the 21st, we went to Grec in Bowling Green. Hardin County was there, and again, we had about 90 attendees. Last night, we were back in Bowling Green at one of their elementary schools who primarily have a Spanish population. And so we had the presentation in both English and Spanish. We only had about 15 people that attended. We had a few that were online, but it is recorded so that any of our Spanish population will be able to go out and watch that and get the same information. So we were really excited to be able to do that for them. Those last 2, like I said, are still going to be happening this week. And on the next slide, you see the others that were rescheduled due to the weather that we had in early January. The first 3 had to be rescheduled. So we'll be going out again February 4th, 12th, and 27th. On the next slide. This is just kind of the structure that we go through, how the meeting flows. So Dr. Fletcher just starts with an opening. We have a staff member from the Division of Innovation. They kind of rotate through. There are several of them that come to the different town halls, and they really share what vibrant learning looks like. And they do a really great job with that, talking about, they have some black and white slides that show the traditional butts in seats and the bubble tests, things like that. And then they show colored pictures of students out in the community, collaborating, working with businesses, doing some really amazing things in their districts to show the difference of what education has been and where it is moving to. Then we have the district that will present, and they just take that even further. The way that this has been flowing has been really great, hearing what it should look like, and then these districts coming in and saying, and here's what we are actually doing. And that has been so well received by everyone. And the districts, like as Jennifer said, have just been absolutely fabulous. Then Jennifer gives the presentation that she just gave to you all. And then Dr. Fletcher comes back and we ask for wows and wonders as opposed to just questions. So he gives them a few minutes to talk to one another and then share out things that they've heard that they're really excited about, and what things do they still have questions about? What are they still wondering about? So on the next slide, we kind of go into those wows and wonders. Nope, we're on observations, sorry. Observation. So what we've seen, participants have been very engaged. The material is well received. Lots of media coverage. I think every single one of ours so far have had media come, and everything that we've seen written so far has been extremely positive. We also had one last night. It was a magazine, a Spanish magazine that came and covered that for their Spanish community. We also really need to thank the Kentucky United We Learn Council, because they have prepared us for this. They have had such great conversations with us and really challenged us to think outside of the box. And so the questions that were received by Dr. Fletcher and Dr. Stafford, for the most part, we didn't hear anything new. They were things that the council has already brought up. So they really did prepare everyone for these town halls. And then, as you already heard, social study teachers really showing up. Now we can move into the wows. So kind of what we're hearing from them is a focus on local flexibility. Folks are really liking that their local accountability piece can focus on what's important to their community. Also, the emphasis on preparing students for a prosperous Kentucky, just ensuring that students are ready for the workforce. Support for diverse learning needs, so including those who do not test well and making sure that they have other ways to demonstrate their learning. Those are all the wows that those are some of the wows that we were hearing. And of course, that was just from our first three. Then we move on to the wonders. So equity, consistency, how is this going to play out from district to district? What will that look like, measuring against one another, if you will, particularly in areas of social studies and writing, as Jennifer said. And then implementation and practicality. How are we going to implement this? That was obviously our educators are asking that question. And then support for teachers and leaders. A lot of educators in the room, wanting to make sure that they have the resources, the training, and the support that they'll need to implement this for their students. And that's what we have so far. And at the end of February, we'll have more feedback.
One of the things that in talking about the wonders is the focus on, for example, we've had some people ask about foreign language being a part of accountability. Well, if that's important to the local district and how the local district wants to implement that into local accountability, we'll support it. We'll support that because that gives the local district the flexibility. Whereas, we've talked about, I really like, I think, Dr. Webb, I think your district and I've heard Logan County and others, one of their indicators revolves around student well-being. What percentage of your students are engaged in co-curricular, extracurricular activities? So again, that's what your people, your community want to hear about, because that's a great indicator. It's an excellent indicator of how successful students are going to be once they leave our classrooms, once they leave our hallways and our doors. So talking about how we want to promote as much flexibility as possible because we want you to address the needs of your local community and make sure that you're meeting with them and making sure that those are being discussed. Also too is, some of the big concerns is with social studies. They're concerned about if it's not a part of accountability, then it's not important. And one of the themes I try to tell people is how do we get out of the mindset that the state has to give an assessment before it to be important? Because, if you look at how a district may look at civics within their community, and that may be a huge focus, how they do that is what their community is asking for. So again, we believe in social studies. As a matter of fact, we believe in writing is a big part of communication, but how you do that locally, I think, is very important. And just because that we're not giving an assessment that is a part of the federal piece, we definitely believe it's very important because we're requiring it in the local piece. But what does that look like for local flexibility? That's our goal. So the question, sometimes you'll hear people talk about big A, little a, as far as accountability, things of that nature, is just because we're not making this a part of the federal accountability system with CSI, TSI, ATSI, it is still extremely important. As a matter of fact, it is law for us to teach standards and social studies at each grade level. So again, those are some things that we have discussions about. And what are those, providing enough support and guardrails for districts that they incorporate social studies, but also the flexibility in how they do that as a part of their local accountability. So we've had some questions about that as we move forward. And we don't have the answers for it all right now. But that's some of the big questions that we have. But again, very supportive, some great conversations. As a matter of fact, we talked a little bit about, if we were to put 2.0 in front of the state legislature, it would have every district using our interim assessments. But we've listened to our co-op directors meetings and also our town halls that we feel like there should be some flexibility. When I say we, the Commonwealth, the people that are talking to us, there should be some flexibility in that. So 3.0, we've already agreed it would include that flexibility. So again, I can't speak highly enough of what's going on in the town halls and the feedback that we're getting. And also too, our road crew that we're going to go to Eddyville coming up on Thursday night, I believe. and just the time that you are committing to be a part of these. And I want to say thank you to each people at KDE here. And also, Susan Strange is not in here. She's usually our organizer. And then we have so much from the Division of Innovation that are helping keeping organized. They actually hold up a 10-minute sign or a 5-minute sign for the commissioner that he's talking too much. He's got 5 minutes to go. So they kind of keep me in line. The nice part is sometimes I go over. But with that being said, it's really it's an excitement when people start talking about having that flexibility. So I'm very excited about where we are up to date. So
on behalf of LSAC, I just want to say thank you as well. I attended the one at Greg, and I understand that the forum actually lasted an extended amount of time, and I appreciate the work that you're doing with that. But I think it's very imperative. So I applaud Dr. Fletcher and your team here at KDE for giving that extra time and that extra energy to go across the great Commonwealth of Kentucky. Thank you very much. And thank you all for the presentation. Do we have anything? Sheila, do you want?
Just a couple questions that I would like to just clarify, just because I think I missed it. For social studies, what did you say the grade levels that they would be assessed on?
For social studies in the current framework, it's 3 through 10. So the opportunity to opt into the state assessment, grades 3 through 10, and be reported.
Okay.
If not the opt-in, then your local district can develop their own if they have that capacity, and then report that as part of the local accountability system.
Okay, so if we do opt in for the state, it would be 3 through 10 is the option, and that's the option. Is that correct?
That is, yes. And again, this is based on, we would need legislative support and,
To provide
changes
the
to
assessment.
statute
And then the writing, what was the
same.
same? So 3 through 10. Okay, so with the school report card, would that all be reported locally and federally in one visual, or have y'all gotten that far yet?
we've talked about it, but we really don't have a final decision because it would be very difficult to have them side by side on one page. So we would still look at the federal part to have the school report card with possibly like links to the local district and how they
Okay.
present. I think that makes the most sense, and that's what we've been discussing. So, for example, you may have some districts, like for example, Shelby County, they have on their website all these charts, graphs, but they also have people telling stories about they're telling their story literally with people talking about how the accountability has made an impact, and their portrait learners made an impact too. Whereas if you look at Kenton County, the data that you supply to your community, and there's actually charts where this is where we're in, I'm going to say in where we need growth, and how you're identifying growth in the community, communicating that, how you communicate that to the district has to have some local accountability with it, local flexibility with it also. So how I would envision it, we haven't really got into a lot of details. We would still have the school report card where we're giving the federal portion with links built in to the local districts' websites.
So with the social studies and the writing being grades 3 through 10, if approved with the legislator, even if the district creates their own assessment, would those grade levels still all have to be assessed? Okay, so we're talking about assessing reading, math, science, social studies, and writing in 3 through 10 across the board. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then for the federal system, the model would be only growth in grades 4 through 8. Is that correct? Or are we assessing from 8th grade to whatever the grade level is that they're going to be assessed? I guess it would be 10 for
I think
growth.
the growth is an elementary and middle school indicator. So
Okay, so it's not in high school.
that's correct.
Okay, that's what I thought I understood, but I wanted to make sure I understood that. Okay.
And there's been some discussion, do we look at social studies in grade bands, like elementary, middle, high school versus 3? Right now in 2.0, we have 3 through 10.
Okay.
Part of that.
Do we have anything else? Anybody online have anything to contribute? Dr. Fletcher, anything else?
The last thing I'll say is, again, this process of developing this accountability has come so far. If you look at the prototypes, it was more about pathways, and we talked about different, this is what potentially could happen. Then we got to the framework where we're giving more details so that we can have better discussions on what does this look like. So expect a 3.0. Hopefully that's where we'll land at a 3.0 coming up in the next few months. And we're going to continue. We continue to talk to legislators about this. And also too, we've had legislators show up at town hall meetings too. So I'm very thankful for that. And the support of those that we've talked to so far has been great.
And I will also mention the co-ops and the directors and their collaboration on this has been tremendous as well.
Absolutely. The work that's being done with the town halls, and not only that, let's even talk about our Seek Roadshow and the partnership that we've had with our co-op directors. Every single co-op director has been excellent to work with and flexible, trying to meet the needs of everyone around, giving input, and just asking, how can we help? So again, we want to thank our co-op directors and our co-ops for all the work that they've invested into this also.
Anything else?
I just have a question about timeline. Given where we are, you mentioned the possibility of some action even this year in some capacities, but given where we are in the short session, limited amount of days for bills and to be filed and those things, do you anticipate statutory changes in the next session if we can get that before?
2026. If we get to that point where we feel good about an assessment system, and then right now we're on that path to have a proposal for 2026. Then notice that those paths at the end really begin there, because even some of the districts we've talked to that's developing their own local accountability system, they don't have full implementation even until 27, 28, and they've been working on this. So that's why that onboarding path is so important. Yes, we have legislation in 2026, but that fall would be the starting point with that pilot of districts that are ready. Let's have them go, we'll learn. Then the next set of districts that may be farther along, and then possibly that third year, look at full implementation. And it may take longer.
And when would you anticipate your RFP for your summative and potential through course formative assessments?
I'll need some help with that.
It would depend on when the legislation would be passed. So if it's 2026, we would start taking the steps in working through the procurement process at that time. So but it takes about 18 months to get the entire process through. So.
Just a question about the legislation. I think that's currently being reviewed for growth for change versus change for this model. That apply to this year's assessment, or would it apply to next year's assessment? I asked Representative Tipton, and he didn't know the answer to that. So that's why I was curious to know what is the expectation if it does pass this month. Is it going to apply to the 24, 23, 24, 25 assessment, or is it going to be 25, 26?
So we're anticipating that those changes would take effect and would impact the 24, 25, this school year, and impact the reporting for fall of 2025. So, there would be needed steps to be taken, obviously, and that it could impact the timeline for reporting. And we know right now that with the changes to the science assessment planned for the spring, we do know that it's going to impact our reporting timeline already. So those activities would have to take place during that time frame as well.
And to add to that, when we talk about growth, we don't have time to develop a brand new growth system. So we would fall back to a system like we used, I think, in 2017. Now, with that being said, that would be kind of a bridge to whatever the new growth system that would be a part of this. So we'd have to have a bridge in there so that we can develop a student growth system for this 2026 proposal. So if this is the legislation is put into place, we would look at a system that would be similar to what was 2017 as a bridge that we build a more, I think, a better growth system than even what we had in 2017. But as far as building a whole new growth system, it'd be very, very difficult for us. There's data there we could already utilize, but actually how that's implemented would have to be, we'd have to have a bridge. Mm-hmm. That would be the bridge.
So just a real quick statement. I don't want to belabor the meeting, but first I want to say thank you. And thank you. I've been doing this a long time and seen lots of different accountability models, and thank you for really listening and making changes. But on the growth model, I know we're talking about implementing what we've done before. I remember vividly having passionate conversations with other superintendents about how that kind of inhibited kids on the upper end. If you had a lot of kids that were on the upper end, the division sometimes went out to 6 and 7 decimal places on whether or not you got growth. We're talking about kids that's been, and then it was adjusted to where if you were proficient, then you got growth or you met growth. So whatever that is comes back in. I know we all know everybody wants to change from change to growth, but there were some very passionate opportunities with growth as well. So I'm sure you all will review all that.
Absolutely. And that was one of the concerns that even I had as a superintendent. If you have a student that's distinguished and they're distinguished again, how do you get measured for growth? You don't want to be penalized, or you don't want the student to be
Yeah,
penalized.
my scale score goes from 235 to 234, but I'm still distinguished, and now I'm no longer growing.
Mhm.
And I'm in the 99th percentile.
Right.
Yeah.
So those are other things that we'll need to talk about as we move forward. But again, I think that what we put in this time would have to reflect what we've done before, and maybe with some tweaks. But I really think that we need to address the growth model, especially if we have that a system that has the wraparound. We could look more about grade level equivalency as opposed to going from proficient to distinguished or something of that nature. Because before it was a chart, you could go from novice high to apprentice low, and you could get points for that individual student. If we all remember that chart, but what does that look like in the 2026 proposal? I think that's what we really need to work on, but we're going to have a bridge to get there.
A motion to adjourn. So moved. Thank you.